going to be able to stitch this together. I know what happened, but anyway, if I can't, this will be part 3 instead of part 2. As I recall, we were right in the middle before the system locked up. We were right in the middle of analyzing the progressive indeterminacy of the collective consciousness, with the argument that religious diversity and that all of the diversity and within a society means that different variants of the God, different variants of Christ, different variants of morality coexist. And that means that, again, that individuals in the society aren't seeing a shared ritual order being uniformly honored, and nor are they participating in a uniform way in a collective punishment of deviance. So you get then a kind of indeterminacy. It becomes vague. It doesn't have as much clarity. So like I said, that like the Ten Commandments become suggestions or guidelines as opposed to moral prohibitions, right? Okay, so what that means is that the share of consciousness that is common across all of the different members of society, right? So you have an organic society with all these different organs, that interact with each other in various ways. The collective consciousness that exists out here, let's say in the barbering trades, and over here in the funeral home director trade, very different, right? And maybe like trash collectors are going to be here, university administrators are going to be here, but very different kind of morality. And so the consciousness that they share is very low, and so the collective consciousness shrinks and the individual consciousness grows. So traditional, all collective; modern, all individual. Okay, so page 226 and on. If collective consciousness remains strong and dominant, the division of labor is going to be retarded or held back, and modernity is going to prevent it from happening. And this is sort of, and he gives examples of this, like the Slovakian clans and tribes of his time were traditional strongholds that made it difficult for the division of labor to develop. For what it's worth, the American South, with the slave system and with kind of this strong sort of collective consciousness that was enforced with, the vendetta and with, lynching and other kinds of things, didn't have the same level of industrial development in the division of labor that the northern states in America had, and to this day they're not quite the same. There's still distinctive forms of industry north and south that has been blurred a lot in the last 30 or 40 years. But the big idea is that the collective consciousness can actively hold back organic society. And again, there's kind of a dialectical relationship here, but an antagonism between something like civil rights and the pursuit of civil rights and the honoring of the cult of the individual, and those who have a traditional desire to revenge those who committed sacrilege against my particular variant of a god, right? All right, so philosophy, science, all these different kinds of works and trades shock religion, and that shock helps to disintegrate and begin to weaken the hold of the collective. The collective type can't be as dominant. It can't reach as many areas of life, right? The God gets weaker. So integration, colonization, resignation to precarious contested existence, elimination of the weak through suicide or genocide, all are possible alternatives to specialization. All are so the division of labor then, to Durkheim, prevents all of these other forms of outcomes to capitalist development or to increasing social density, right? Instead of genocide, we have a division of labor. We can make use of you, right? Somewhere in our economy, rather than have to kill you because you seem different. Again, that's the logic of the organic modern world as opposed to the traditional world of organic solidarity, of mechanical solidarity. So modern life, because of the increased struggle for existence, you require individuality, autonomy, less group control, and that means you have to have an abstraction then of religion and law. God is love instead of God will kill you if you do X, Y, or Z, right? And an abstraction of law as well. You get kind of like value generalization. Page 230. Modernity then creates a strange new force and locale for gods. In some variants of Christianity, God becomes a faceless, nameless, placeless, universal that isn't really functioning with absolute right and wrong and so on, but it becomes, again, kind of God is love that infuses us, a kind of Quaker notion of the inner light, that kind of thing. All right, and that is deeply embedded in the notion of civil rights. Okay, so different kinds of gods that are much more universalized, much more abstract. So the upshot then is that you allow for increased individual autonomy in the modern world. Other things go along with that. You get social and geographic migration leads to all kinds of culture contact and diversity, right? So you send a kid to a university, you send a kid away from a small town, get him into a city. It is a liberalizing thing. You see people of difference who live different kinds of lives and who seem to function just fine. And that's a kind of liberalizing force. And that this, again, helps to break down the strength of the collective consciousness. The mingling of diverse moralities in cities requires something like, a liberal attitude. The loss of the older generation's desire with the power to punish, mixed in with, again, the need for people to move to the city because cities tend to eat people and they always need refreshing from the outside. So the old cease to be revered. They become pitied and scorned. Cities are youthful relative to the countryside. They're not traditional. They have a desire for novelty instead of a desire to continue the old ways. All of this helps to loosen the hold of the collective consciousness. And it's one of the reasons why traditional religion, like Southern evangelical religious leaders, tend to wail against cities, right, as places of immorality and sin and that kind of thing, right? Decadence. Page 238, the decline of informal social control, shaming and shunning doesn't work anymore. You can't shame somebody if they can just move to another city or move across town. Collective punishment of deviance isn't effective anymore. You get sent to prison if you attempt to violate someone's civil rights by punishing them for the violation of your particular sacrilege, right? So all of this, expiatory rituals, ritual punishment all becomes less powerful. Sacrilege goes unpunished, and so the power of the gods becomes diminished. And then page 242, why can't organs generate and maintain collective consciousness like segments? So as we move in an organically bonded group, why don't we have something like the, let's say, the American Association of Plumbers function with the same kind of strength that a village priest would have functioned? And he argues it doesn't happen because the organs only cover the professional, the work life, as opposed to private life, that gets split off. You might have avocations that dominate that. Organs cover a small percentage of the total population. They lack that power of unification, right? So it isn't universal participation in rights. You might have your annual dinner dance with the other plumbers, but you're not going to be participating in a society-wide ritual of killing the sacred goat or something. So organs have open-ended, abstract, and practical rules that are instrumental, not moral commandments and absolutes. They need innovation. So it functions differently. Or the organs of organic solidarity function differently than the segments of mechanical society. You have something like, again, instrumental perfection of technique, so that you can do your job better, versus absolute right and wrong with punishment of deviance. Okay, so that means the division of labor then has generated a modern society, chapter 5, with flexible social forms that are capable of innovation and adaptation, an adaptive response to the perpetual instability of the industrial economy. Specialization is reconstituting human character, growing rationality, adaptive intelligence, while page 283 here, while losing general skills and mindedness. So you're losing that incredibly high emotional reaction to the violation of something like a shared sacred rule. You change your parish. Modernity has normal instability. Organs and organisms remain open-ended and change over time, and they're expected to do that. Entire professions are expected to disappear over time. Again, it's really difficult to find horseshoe associations that are anywhere near as powerful as, say, but they would have been, 150 years ago. So modernity is stronger because it generates something like what Herbert Spencer calls a spontaneous order. So by allowing each individual to find their own little niche, to follow their talent and taste into the position that they wish to pursue, to find their niche in the world, and then by joining an association of other people who are also pursuing that particular niche, you get niches that function really well. You get organs that function well. And the freedom that allows for that individual movement within each of these organs allows the whole system to work better. So something like a liberal modern culture builds a stronger society. And in Durkheim's terms, this is a more moral society than one that strongly punishes deviance for extraneous reasons, right? So worrying less about who's going to the toilet in a particular bathroom is probably going to work against developing the organic solidarity, the freedom of movement, the freedom of consciousness, the instrumentalism necessary to build a strong modern society. So what it means is societies that adopt something like a modern, liberal, secular culture tend to perform better economically, and in the long run have higher productivity, higher standard of living, better politics. They score higher on the or score lower on the human misery index, that kind of thing, than those again that put all of their energy into punishing deviance and maintaining outmoded morality that doesn't quite fit the world in which people find themselves. Okay, so functions then become independent of specific organs. That goes on. We'll leave that behind. So page 275, Durkheim writes about the need for moral education. I've got his other book here. Just to say, Durkheim was an education professor as much as he was a sociologist. He really did help design and kind of maintain the pedagogic, sort of like the secular curriculum within France, and help teach the teachers of teachers within France. And so he's really a strong advocate for developing a modern education system that teaches something like modern morality. Republican schools, which means, democratic schools, it means, state schools that advance the Republican ideals of a free society, as opposed to the religious ideals of the Catholic Church, who dominated, church schools in France had been entirely religious prior to this. And then trying to get people to create an imaginary understanding of the division of labor. So what Durkheim argued was the best way to build a good society is to teach people sociology, to help them understand the kind of unconscious structure of the world around them, so that they're not as fearful of it, not as fearful of diversity, not as locked into an outmoded right way to live, not overly worried about people's sex life or personal notions of sin or something like that, but much more focused upon being instrumentally effective in your chosen calling, in your profession, and then to provide people with a kind of, again, that's where the ethics and morality of the world reside to Durkheim, is in your specific calling in your profession in the modern world, okay? And that's going to make the modern world freer, more self-aware, more effective, and so on. So he has a very positive notion of the division of labor in society. It's a good thing, he thinks, more modern, and it's something we simply have to embrace. Well, book 3, so it seems like he's kind of a conservative. Hey, this guy likes capitalism. Hey, this guy just wants the world to unfold the way it is, and if you don't like it, tough. It's you just adapt yourself to what's going on. But when you get to book 3, the third part of the book, you realize that Durkheim is actually a radical critic of actually existing modern capitalism. And that he argues that, look, what I outlined for you in the previous book, 2 books, a world of organic solidarity and freedom and liberalism and self-chosen professions and people able to find their calling and their vocations and avocations and leading self-chosen lives and going on individuated journeys and being really strong and capable in their professions and finding a morality that's linked to the job that you do, right? All of that, he claims it doesn't happen very much in the modern world. So he's like a doctor. So he's some people call it the social pathologist approach. So he's like a physician. So he's built a model of what a normal modern society would look like, right? It's a world of organic solidarity and a division of labor, with all of the other features that were linked to it, right? So in our little chart here, right, this is what a good modern society would look like. It would have these features. And not good necessarily in a kind of absolute moral sense. It's just that's what a normal society would look like if it were fully congruent with organic solidarity, right? And it would be an effective society. It would have sort of all of the best features of modernity combined with an elimination of the worst features. All right, so he's like a doctor then that has a model, an image of what a good society would look like. And then he looks at actually existing sick societies and he says, look, there's something wrong with these things. Something wrong with America, there's something wrong with Britain, something wrong with France, something wrong with Germany. There's something wrong. And I'm going to use my notion, my model of what a good society would look like to diagnose what's wrong with these other societies and try to prescribe medicine or a treatment regime, a solution to transform a pathological, disease, sick, abnormal society into one that's normal and healthy. I want to really strongly emphasize something. Durkheim, in all of this now, he's not going to say what we need to do is to go back to a traditional way of life. He doesn't want to reignite a traditional notion of God. He doesn't think that you solve the pathologies in the modern world by punishing deviants, by going after those who have sexual sin or something like that. Again, getting worried about gays. It's not about getting guns or promoting a lifestyle of fear and paranoia or something like that. Instead, Durkheim argues that the way that you move from pathology to normalcy is to figure out what's getting in the way, what's preventing the full realization of normalcy, and then negating it. So he would like to see modern societies become fully modern, and he'd like to remove the disease. So he doesn't want to see modern societies go back to being traditional. He doesn't want to see a reignition of traditional gods, traditional morality, traditional notions of crime, traditional notions of moral outrage. He instead wants to see the development of a modern division of labor, and all of the liberalism, the autonomous individuality, the kind of workplace ethics, and so on, the freedom of movement necessary for people to do a good job, right? Anonymity, that kind of thing. So how do we move from pathology into normal, healthy life? And if you read this last section, you realize Durkheim is every bit as radical as Marx. Mark Worrell has been trying to promote Marx-Heimian sociology. I think I'm there too, with maybe wanting to add in a few more people. But he thought that Marx and Durkheim had so much in common and had a kind of shared agenda that Marx-Heimianism would be a worthwhile foundation. He's written about this quite a bit. It actually appears in some of the things that he and I have written together. But so let's take a look at the three pathological forms. So there's three sicknesses, right? Three diseased forms. And Durkheim's going to diagnose them using his model of what a good society would look like, and then kind of try to come up with a solution for them based upon what's wrong. So anomic division of labor, these are actually existing modern capitalist societies that lack the capacity to coordinate and modulate the divided organs. Mutual need is there without an overarching controlling mechanism, and he argues this on page 305. So the organs aren't coordinated and they're not regulated. So what happens is that you get kind of you get kind of organs that are out of line with each other. You get desires that are out of line with the capacity to realize them. You get all kinds of disruption, so there needs to be a coordinating mechanism. You need business regulation, right? If something like a railroad, like in Iowa, in the years after the Civil War, if the railroads get out of control and they begin crushing all other industry and all other business and all life, they need to regulate them, right? If a monopoly exists, you got to regulate it, control it. If you wind up with a diseased or parasitic industry, or you wind up with one that's directly damaging society, like maybe Facebook right now or Twitter right now, right, where the social media is actually working against the collective intelligence of our society, then you regulate it, right? You control it. You seize control of it. And so you bring the different phases of society back into line with each other. So my first book was written about the impact of the stock market on industry, on automobile plants and so on. And my argument is that you really needed to re-regulate finance. That there had been this massive deregulation during the Clinton years. It really reached a sort of peak during Clinton, and that you needed to re-regulate in order to ensure that that the producers of value weren't being overwhelmed and overridden and overmastered by the traders and collectors of already existing surplus value. In other words, the people who sort of live off of stock trading, these program traders, the new hedge funds and equity managers and so on, have taken control of the economy to a large degree, and that meant it was out of whack right? So that's what Durkheim says, right? You need something like governmental activity and authority that can regulate and control what goes on. So if the organs are out of touch, out of communication with each other, out of whack with each other, you can't even represent, this is part of the thing, right? Like you can't even represent to yourself and to other people what's going on. Employers can't see the big picture about what's happening and so on. So there needs to be some education that goes into this too. So you need to have an education system that's teaching people sort of what is the state right now of the division of labor, where do you fit within the system, what's going to happen. So again, there's a kind of an educative function here too, to take away fear, to take away paranoia, to take away wrong solutions, to help convince people that maybe the answer isn't to build a wall and to sort of demonize brown people, but maybe the answer is instead to regulate industry and to imagine where we're at right now in global capital and how to make it better. So page 306 then, there's a Marxist critique of alienated labor. Very much so is there. A critique of degraded work, of alienation, of a lack of understanding. So he's really critiquing. So anomie is really a kind of a lack of identification with the overarching system, where you don't see yourself in a regulated structure, where you can't see the whole, you can't see the universal, you can only see your individuality and maybe your narrow particularity, you can't see the universal. So something like workplace democracy, worker self-management, worker control, and something like industrial education with a real democratic focus might be the solution to that. So that's how it would be accomplished. So professional producers, industry trade associations, and so on, guided by social science, that would be a solution. So you'd have these organs that would emerge to help educate, to raise the consciousness of workers, to raise the consciousness of industry leaders, so that there was a kind of generalized understanding of how each industry fits within the overarching division of labor and how workers fit within that system. Rather than, so again, you don't have stupid workers who don't understand what's going on in their industry. They understand as well, right? So you eliminate the general anomie, alienation from society by producing, generating moral education in Republican schools, again, teaching sociology, quite honestly, to people. It's the same thing that Dewey and James wanted to do here in America, the early pragmatists, right? Is to build schools here that helped educate people to comprehend the modern world, not fear it, and then to build the kind of musculature needed for a self-managed democratic society. Well, we don't do that. And this is one of the things he thinks. So you get rid of general anomie in that way, and then you get rid of work anomie that lacks coordination, alienation at work. You can't see where you fit into the overarching picture real fast. I worked in a microwave oven factory, and again, workers didn't understand how what they were doing fit within the larger whole. They weren't rewarded for understanding it either, which is part of the problem. But just sort of developing the overall intelligence of people, so that they're not just alienated, not just giving up their labor in a way, in a kind of automaton way, but being an active agent in their own life and contributing to the development of their field in a quasi-professional way. And so you need to have workplace association and so on. Europe's system of co-determination, so the continental system of finance, where seats on the board of directors are co-held by owners and workers. Perfect, right? That's the exact sort of thing. And of course, this comes sort of out of Durkheim's analysis here, right? It's the same solution. How do you help integrate people into an industrial system? How do you make sure an industrial system doesn't just lead to this crazy anomie where nobody understands what's going on? Well, you have good corporate governance, good workplace governance, good worker control. So, universities, faculty governance at universities used to work that way. It's been blown away recently, but it used to be that. So one mode of sickness is the anomic division of labor, where everything is out of joint. Individuals don't understand where they fit within a larger system, and the units, the organs, don't quite coordinate well with the others. Government regulation, generalized education, and then dramatic increase of worker industry associations, where a kind of ethic and a kind of comprehension of the overarching system is taught. So again, sort of teaching industrial sociology or economic sociology to the masses. That would be the basic idea. It would also enhance democracy. It would have all kinds of positive side effects as well. Chapter 2 then deals with another sick form of capitalism, the forced division of labor. So Durkheim argues, look, he's a classic liberal. And he would like to see. So the basic idea is that, in Durkheim, like other sort of socialists that were coming out of the classic liberal tradition, is that, if workers are able to self-choose what they want to do, they can find a calling or profession that they enjoy that harmonizes with the people around them, right? So the concept of harmony was really big in French socialist circles. Like New Harmony, Indiana. If you've ever been, it's on the banks of the Wabash River, but it's an old foyerist commune, basically. So it had this sort of French notion, New Harmony, that if we come here, we get enough people working together, everybody self-chooses what they want to do, and we wind up with a world without alienation, and where people can be happy. Again, doing a vocation is avocation. That was the idea anyway. So that notion of harmony. So you get a productive, powerful, good society with a massive sublimation of human energy into productive work instead of destructive activity. That's the goal, right? You want people self-choosing their job and then going into the job and flowing with their playful energies into work, right? But that requires then something like a true equality of opportunity. If you don't have equality of opportunity, then you can't have people self-choosing a profession that means something to them. They can't use their talent and taste to find what they want to do. They're instead forced by poverty, forced by ignorance, forced by geographic immobility, forced by the lack of civil rights, race, class, gender, sexuality, that prevents people from doing what they want to do with their life. So the color line being an effective way to bar, black working class workers from union jobs, that has to go. Gender discrimination that prevents women from having an equal footing in the workplace, right? That's got to go. Rules limiting gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual people from having an equal footing in the workplace, that's got to go, right? So classic liberalism, strong civil rights to allow people to have an equality of opportunity where they can get the training to develop their talent in accord with their taste, so that you kind of get a maximum flow of energy in the work that Kevin Amadon and I did on Wilhelm Reich. We wind up with something like an erotics of work. I'm not saying like sexual erotics, but work is play, work is fun, right? If in a well-developed modern system, a socialist system maybe. So what do you need to have this happen? It's a critique then of structural inequalities. That's what this is all about. Structural inequalities have got to go, and then a demand for socialist and democratic reform to fix it. So in the northern United States, increased equality of opportunity led to increased solidarity, organic solidarity, and a more moral society capable of functional adaptation. So the northern United States in the 1890s, when Durkheim was writing, was an advanced industrial economy, but the southern United States had much lower equality of opportunity because it had much greater structural inequality, right? Race was the massive, the color line, this massive structure of inequality, the remnant of slavery, Jim Crow, gender line, really rigidly enforced, right? Xenophobia. And so that prevented organic solidarity, and you wound up with a much weaker, less moral society and much less adaptive. So it was like a third world country relative to the North, right? And so within the United States in the North, the equality of opportunity that was ensured by public schools and more intervention in the system of structural inequality, more social democracy, quite honestly, led to a more adaptive, modern world. Everybody benefited. And in the American South, the rigidity of the color line, the reaction, the mechanical solidarity of the heritage of the South, right, led to this massively degraded society where industrial development, modernity, essentially passed the South by until well into the 20th century. So. And there are still parts of the South that still lack market towns and market roads. It's sort of amazing to travel through parts of rural Virginia where you really see that the 19th century essentially left rural Virginia alone. So at any rate, An intervention. So his big argument, page 316, relative equality of condition is a necessary requisite for effective contracts. So forced contracts are not valid, right? So if you're poor and you can't get a college education and you're forced then, despite the fact that you might be intelligent, you can't get anything but a working class job that pays shit, right? That is not the kind of division of labor that Durkheim's calling for. What he wants is a division of labor that is rooted in an equality of opportunity, where your talent, taste, and merit lead to the position that you're in, right? So, and we all benefit from that, right? So it's a social democratic society. A social democratic society, again, if you read this section on the forced division of labor, he is every bit as radical as Marx, right? So he wants a weak state, at least, a weak enough state that ensures, strong enough, but still weak, that ensures care, comfort, safety. What's that? Weak? I'm going to get rid of that. It's stronger than what we have here. It's a state. It's a big mama state, a weak big daddy state, but a strong big mama state, right? Much farther to the left, right, than some Marxists, right? Security of the populace guarantees liberty, equality of opportunity, and so on, right? Intervening in structural inequality, making sure that children aren't overrepresented among people in poverty right now, right? Allowing people to get college degrees without taking on, massive burdens of debt, that kind of thing. All right, so that's what he's looking for. So if you read that section, it's an intervention in structural inequality, the need to have relative equality of opportunity in order to have an effective division of labor. So type 1, the first sixth society was anomic. People don't understand what's going on. There's no regulation, and there's no sort of education in how the system works. So he has solutions to that. Sick type 2 is the forced division of labor. America is really in his eyesight there, where there isn't, where people are forced by the whip of hunger into jobs that they wouldn't want to take, taking stigmatized jobs where their labor is extracted out of them, instead of being in a position in a job and having control over their work and the work process, that leads to a good modernity, a social democracy. So he wants to intervene. All right, chapter 3, there's another form, most called it the anarchic division of labor. This is a world in which there's, if indeed in Durkheim's world, our moral order is linked to an organ, and if you're not working, you're not in an organ, if there's a general economic downturn, the organs aren't functioning, people are laid off, and therefore they're not around other workers, and they're not developing their instrumental skills, and so the system doesn't work. It doesn't hold people to the moral order. The moral order falls apart. All right? So people have to be employed and tied into the moral order, and the moral order needs to be more or less continuous. So work stoppages, economic downturns, large periods of unemployment, large sectors of the industrial reserve army not being part of it, having a huge underclass that doesn't find living wage employment, having regions of the United States, like I said, the American South, the backcountry South during his time, before the TVA, few jobs, little electrification, lots of ignorance, and that, and so this is a place where the moral order was suspended, and so so the crises occur that throw people out of work and suspend capitalist activity, or just simple modern work activity. Production becomes efficient, and some applies and fails to employ the population. I think that's a problem. Production is not well coordinated, and then therefore people spend a lot of downtime changing occupations, trying to find the right job for themselves. We don't have good worker training. We don't have good vocational, counseling and that kind of thing. So what Durkheim wants to do is intervene again to ensure something like a continuity of work and a flow of people from grade school into, say, vocational training or education, higher education, directly into various callings and professions, and then worker retraining programs were needed, and then have massive systems of employment, right, where the government directly employs people to keep them in the workplace, to keep the moral order going. Because if that is where morality exists in the modern world, in the organs of work, then you need to be working, right? So here again, we're right on board with Marx's writings on in the Goethe program and in the Communist Manifesto. It's a worker democracy is what he's calling for, where there's a kind of obligation to work, and that the world works best when everyone who can work does, again, where even the disabled find enough training where they can contribute in a meaningful way to an overarching society. So I think that's going to end it here. So Durkheim, again, is as radical a critic of actually existing capitalist modernity as Marx ever was. And this book, written when he was a very young man, prior to suicide, prior to elementary forms of religious life, prior to his writings about Germany and during World War I, astoundingly powerful. So I really like this book. And again, he's telling us about the structural unconscious of capitalism, the structural unconscious of the modern world. No one wanted this, but understanding what it is, adapting to it, understanding what the possibilities are, the good possibilities, and then finding ways to intervene once you understand what the possibilities are, intervening to realize them by negating the negative, right, is important. So Dr. Durkheim, the man who diagnoses sick capitalist society and finds a way to make them better. Okay, we'll end it there.